So for those of you who I don't know already, I'm Brooke Alford. I am the past president of Central Chapter INPS board, and I'm also an educator at Purdue Extension in Marion County, who's hosting us tonight. And I am mainly just here to introduce Lisa and let her talk to us about the amazing work that's going on out at Newfields. So for those of you who don't know Lisa, she's the manager of natural resources. She's been with Newfields since May of 2022. Most recently, she served as the assistant operations and property manager for White River State Park, where she gained experience controlling invasive plants in a riparian setting in the Urban Wilderness Trail. Lisa has a master's degree in environmental science with concentrations in applied ecology and water resources from Indiana University. She recently served as the vice president for the White River Alliance and currently sits on the board of directors for Friends of the White River. She is co-chair of Reconnecting to Our Waterways White River Committee. Lisa's work includes private estate gardening, erosion mitigation, and raptor rehabilitation. So Lisa, thank you for not only all of the great work that you do and have done, but for being here tonight to share an hour with us to tell us more about the riparian work at Newfields, the remediation of a gravel pit. So
absolutely. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I will say I was speaking to an environmental engineer over the weekend and I used the word remediation and he corrected me. It is the reclamation of a gravel pit. Remediation typically includes the removal of chemicals, and so that's, I just had just for clarification, we're talking not about the removal of environmental chemicals, but the reclamation of what was once a gravel pit mine. So looking at the locations of everyone, I assume that you are all familiar with Newfields. If not, I will give a quick overview. We are the Indianapolis Museum of Art, but we have a 152-acre campus, and I will be speaking about the park, which is a riparian floodplain that we are remediating. So if you all don't mind, I will stop my video and share my screen and start this presentation. We just failed this all. So welcome, I'm Lisa Milton. For those of you who came in late, I've been the manager of natural resources at Newfields for approximately 8 months now, and I'm going to talk to you about the remediation of a gravel pit and the creation of an art and nature park. So this is the Virginia B. Fairbanks Art and Nature Park at Newfields. It is approximately 100 acres of riparian floodplain that was once a gravel pit. We have aerial photographs to inform us of the historical land uses. We know that it was once an agricultural field. This is a picture from 1937 that was sourced probably from Indiana Map that shows that in 1937 it was agricultural land. So wetlands, this would have been riparian wetland. Before that, wetlands had been drained with drain tiles throughout the state, with a big push in the early 1900s to really farm as much land as possible. So we have, we can see by 1956, the land was starting to naturalize. You can see that nice buffer on the western side of the map that was never cleared. That is still the more old growth forest part of the park today. And then by 1962, you can see that it was operated as a quarry. So the land that had started to naturalize was cleared and a large pit formed that is now the lake today. We have aerial photographs from this era that show the active gravel pit. So you can see where water is present within that pit. That is the area that is the deepest part of the lake, and that is also really close to the area that I will show you in a few slides that is the inflow and outflow from the lake to the river. Here's another photograph. I find this really a drastic view of what it was like. This is what the museum looked like in 1971. And you can see the active gravel pit operation behind the museum and what is now the park. So behind that line of trees in this photograph is the White River. The White River flows through Indianapolis, as you all know, and is undergoing some revitalization for sure within all across Marion County and Hamilton County. So we know that by 1974, the lake had been filled in. So a lot of the presentations or a lot of the research that I've seen on gravel pit remediation focuses on more dry land pits. A lot of those gravel pits in Indiana, especially the really old pits, such as this one, are really close to a river and in a floodplain, and would have filled in regardless of whether they were dredged to be lakes. So I want to show you, this is a map of all of the sand and gravel pits that have been abandoned in the state of Indiana. This is the White River watershed. So that's the watershed that we are in. If you're not familiar with the watersheds, I know this is a plant group, not necessarily a water group. This is all of the water from that section of land drains into the White River, which is where we get our drinking water. It's where a lot of us recreate, and it's really critical that we keep this area of land clean in order to protect our drinking water and the habitat that is utilized within our area of residence. So this is the same watershed for Hamilton County and Marion County, as well as several other counties in the surrounding area. So why are there so many gravel pits in our watershed? There are nearly 300 abandoned gravel pits in our watershed, and that is because of glaciation. And so this is a map with the watersheds, and it also shows the Wisconsin glacial limit. So as the glaciation occurred, the glaciers were retreating, deposited gravel and sand within this area, and left a lot of gravel resources, which we need for construction and other things. But these areas, when left abandoned, have a lot of remediation concerns or restoration concerns.
Wi-Fi.
So here is a picture. You can see the Virginia Bee Fairbanks Art and Nature Park down here in the lower portion of the screen. You can really see that river bend in the canal. And upstream, you can see all of these odd-shaped lakes. Those are primarily abandoned gravel pits as well. The purple and green dots on this map, which are a little hard to see, that is an active gravel pit that is Martin Marietta that is upstream. So I want to talk about how this impacts the water quality and how this impacts the plant community and how we can take a holistic approach to species conservation, the protection of our waterways, and also the protection of our soils. So this, I just wanted to share, is a map of the impaired streams in Indiana. An impaired stream means that it meets, or it doesn't meet water quality standards on one of many factors. And a waterway not being considered impaired doesn't mean that, a waterway not being on this map doesn't mean it's not impaired. It often means that it hasn't been sampled by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So this, you can see, are some really odd-shaped lakes upstream with neighborhoods surrounding them. This is what is very typical in central Indiana of a gravel pit. You see neighborhoods around it. The cost of land is really high, and especially lakefront land is really desired. So this is what it often looks like, and this is what ours looks like. So ours, because it was left to naturalize for a period of 30 years between 1974 and 2004, was really inundated with invasive species and a lot of heavy soil erosion issues, as I will talk about briefly. So here is, this was a study that was done in New Hampshire on sand and gravel mines. You can really see here how this can be a source of disturbance on natural lands. The native vegetation is removed, the soils are disturbed, it often results in xeric soils. We, in our gravel pit, luckily have entirely alluvium, have a high organic matter riparian soil, so we don't have the soil degradation issues that occur in a lot of upland sand and gravel pits, but that is a common occurrence even in the northern parts of the states, especially. This study I found really interesting because really pertinent to our site, because the habitat, they found that the remnants of the gravel mine operation were really critical habitat to herps, to snakes and other reptiles, turtles and other reptiles. But this comes with heavy management of soil restabilization, water quality controls, and obviously revegetation of the site. So this is a picture from the Virginia Beach Fairbanks Art and Nature Park. This, I put this here somewhat as a joke because of the tires, but all of these rock piles that you can find throughout the park, although they may be, some people find them unsightly, I find them really interesting and really a remnant of the historical land use, and they can also really be critical habitat. Obviously, we are working to remove the tires and other remnants that come from illegal dumping of unmanaged naturalized sites along the river. But these rock piles can really be critical habitat. There was a study by Butler University in 2005 that compared the species or the turtle populations by species between the lake that was once the gravel pit and the adjacent canal, and found that we have a lot of pond sliders that utilize that space, which you would expect because of the lack of running water compared to the canal. But we do definitely have a thriving turtle population in the park. So soil erosion. We have a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of soil erosion issues because of the degradation of the disturbance of the gravel pit operation, but also because it was left to naturalize unmanaged for such a long time. We had an inundation of a lot of woody invasive species, including Lonicera mackie, which is allelopathic, kills all of the other plants around it, and also has really shallow roots. And so as these plants get heavy in our loose, silty, loam soils that we have throughout the park, these root balls disengage and cause additional erosion. In order to create a path around the lake, the previous manager, which I have found was just a brilliant person who had a lot of value. Although I have not met Chandler Bryant, I really have been amazed with the management practices that he put in place and all of the research that he did. So this was a causeway that they created because I assume that they couldn't put in a normal bridge in this area because the lake flows in and out of this channel into the river, and that can be at a really high velocity. And so Hoosier Aquatic Management, who is now Living Log Aquatic Services, came in and put it in a causeway using a culvert and soil tubes. I included this picture because for anyone who's really interested in soil erosion, whether it's for the remediation of a gravel pit or soil erosion at home, these features can be really critical tools to slow down water or to stop erosion. So these brown logs that you see are made out of coconut coir. They are meant for water to pass through. The black logs that you see behind are soil tubes, and those are used to stabilize. So even though this was put in 2012, so over 10 years ago now, those soil tubes still remain even with the high velocities of that river flow in and out of this channel. So with the rising water and the high velocities of the river, obviously during peak flows, we can see up to 16 feet at this river gauge at Nora, which is 11 feet is flood stage, so 16 feet is significant. But in 2010, there was a breach of this levee. So gravel pits aren't really heavily regulated. They're regulated on a local municipality level, or often by the county surveyor or county engineers. And especially back when this gravel pit was utilized, there was very little regulation as to how close to a river or how close to another body of water these pits could be installed or utilized. So they left an extremely thin piece of land between the lake and the river. So even just looking at this picture, if you have any understanding of fluvial dynamics, you would assume that eventually that area of land would erode over time and perhaps breach. There's also very little bedrock under this. So as I mentioned before, this was very likely riparian wetland. The rivers naturally meander and carve out bedrock over time. So the bedrock is over 50 feet below the surface of the soil in this area, according to the closest geological information that we have. So with very little bedrock to hold anything in place, it's essentially a berm of very loose soil that runs between the river and the lake. So in 2010, it breached, and something very similar to a gabion basket was utilized along that breach to repair the levee. When a hard armor is put in place, the water typically tends to scour on either side of that hard armor, and so it was a temporary fix. And additional erosion mitigation occurred later on. So here you can see that berm on the left that was severely eroded. The path around the lake had to be closed because it was dangerous to guests. Burke Engineering was hired to do a study of the erosion area. They determined that it was best to reduce the berm in one area. So the berm was reduced so that the river could overflow at peak flows, so you didn't get that high velocity at the very top of the berm. And then a heavy geotextile was used, and a combination of herbaceous and woody species were utilized to both anchor that really silty loam soil in place, and also cause serve as an herbaceous layer with fine root fibers to hold the topsoil in place. And so that picture on the right is what it looks like today in winter. I wish I had a better picture of it in bloom, because this is a nice array of native vegetation, including flowering vegetation. And it's really quite beautiful to walk through there in the summer. So how all of this impacts our water quality for in our river, and also how water quality impacts the native plants in the park are really integral, and they definitely impact each other. So this is a picture of in 2009 of the river being really high. So you can imagine any loose soil is going to wash into that river, and the primary pollutant into the White River is sediment. It brings more phosphorus, which causes algae blooms, any pollution that is on that land. So any oils or anything of that nature obviously wash into the river, but the primary concern in the White River is soil erosion. So the White River Alliance, this is something that Chandler spearheaded, was working with the White River Alliance to do water sampling in the channel between the lake and the river. So that channel where I showed you the Blake Bridge Causeway, that is where this water sampling takes place, and it still occurs today. I was just out there with them a month ago doing water sampling. It is one of the most difficult of their sites. They sample water to add to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management database up throughout Marion County and Hamilton County. And this is definitely one of the trickier sites, but they've been a really great partner in continuing to do this water sampling. So you can see here on the left is the channel water quality, and they have this great dashboard that shows the water quality index. And this channel has a lower water quality index than the White River at Newfields, as you can see on the right. Thompson Run at 465, which is an active gravel pit outfall. And then at the bottom, you can see Carmel Creek at Oliver's Woods. That is the closest sampling location to the active gravel pit at Martin Marietta. So it is because of this high turbidity. You can see that the turbidity units on the left are significantly higher than the turbidity units at any of these other sites. It's because of all of the loose soil and the need for additional erosion mitigation on the site. So this is just to show any loose soil in the park could obviously pollute the White River, and any chemicals in the White River could pollute the soils in the park. So vegetation management. As I mentioned, we have an influx of invasive species. And this isn't just historical. Obviously, the land being left unmanaged for 30 years, it did not help anything. But we continue to fight an inundation of invasive plant seeds from the White River, especially. We have a really significant phalaris infestation where the original gravel pit outfall was. So where they originally were pumping water to the river from the original gravel pit is where the most degraded soils are, and where we can find the highest phalaris population. It's also where Japanese knotweed can be found. Down at your bottom left, the Ranunculus ficaria, or what is now Ficaria verna, is the most critical invasive species that we have on the site, because it's really detrimental to the early spring ephemerals that are crucial to pollinators in the early spring. So Chandler and Greg Butts after him was the manager following Chandler, put into place a GIS system to do data collection. So this is a map of all of the Lonicera mackey, the Amur bush honeysuckle that has been removed on the property. If you include the lake out of the 100 acres, we have approximately 77 acres have been cleared of honeysuckle to date. well, but that includes the 35-acre lake. But we're getting there. We're getting there. We still see herbaceous layer honeysuckle in the areas that have been cleared, but through continuous removal through our volunteer program, and thanks in large part to Purdue Extension's Master Gardener program and all of the volunteers that we get through there, we're really making a huge impact on this site. And that has been shown through some data collection that I will share with you. Here are just some giant honeysuckle. These are old pictures that I found on a drive of the original clearing. That's the tractor and chipper that we use. So all of the mulch that we use on site goes through this chipper. It's all from wood that we've either cut down because they were dangerous trees, or most of it's really from the honeysuckle that we clear. And this is a giant honeysuckle, and also shows how long honeysuckle has been cleared on this site. So in addition to removing invasives, you have to obviously replace them, or you still have soil erosion problems and continuous influx of these invasive plants. I've heard in a lot of circles in Indianapolis the wisdom to just let places naturalize. And I think that this is just a great case study in what happens if you let a place naturalize unmanaged, especially along the river. And so the planting of native plants is really critical, obviously, but the active management of these sites and not allowing them to just flourish with invasive plants is certainly my recommendation to anyone trying to work in these spaces. And that includes the use of chemicals where necessary. One of the greatest projects that has happened on this site to date, before I get into the research that's occurred on the site, is the Wild Birds Unlimited Native Pollinator Meadow. This was approximately 2 acres of Robinia pseudoacacia, the black locust, which is it's a tree that is not native to Marion County. It was often planted for soil stabilization and was likely introduced into this space or along the canal for that purpose. It spreads through runners, and it can create monocultures, and it's also a scrubby early succession tree that is not that, although it has some benefit to pollinators due to its really strong inflorescence in the spring, it doesn't have a lot of wildlife value like some of the oaks or hickories or other trees that would be more desirable in the space. So approximately 2 acres of black locust dominant forest was cleared for this planting that is targeted to support native pollinators and native insects. We are working out in this space weekly, sometimes twice a week, with Master Gardener volunteers, hand weeding, and only using chemicals if something like Canada thistle or crown vetch or something that spreads through runners and can only be killed with the use of a chemical. And in those cases, we make sure that it's not blooming so that we don't have an unintentional impact on the pollinators that are utilizing the site. We are also we are exploring the use of fire in the site. We use fire to manage some of the other plantings in the park. On this site, as of right now, we have only mown down, but mown, by mown I mean cut and let it lay, so that those overwintering insects can continue to thrive. So we are blessed with data at this space. We have a restoration study that was conducted by Butler University by Rebecca Dolan and Marcia Moore. And I have to say, when I said that I would do this presentation, both of these wonderful women reached out to me with so much information. And I'm really, really grateful for them. So they were excited for me to share their work. So although I was not engaged with this study, I did not work at Newfields with the study, I'm going to present some of the findings of this study. So they did an inventory in 2004, or an inventory starting in 2001, 2000 to 2001, that was funded by the city of Indianapolis and Indy Greenways. And the results were presented to the director of horticulture for the museum at that time, Mark Zalonis. And then they did a quantitative vegetation analysis in 2004 and 2005 that was funded by the museum, and then a resurvey in 2019 to show whether the restoration efforts were working. So here they ran 5 transects of 100 meters in length each. They chose these transects to cover a range of the plant communities, since we have that really wonderful old growth forest in the area that was never disturbed. And then also the really highly disturbed areas between the lake and the museum. Transect 2 is a really interesting space. That's one of my favorite parts of the park. That's it's really, it's kind of a slough of the river, and you get some really interesting species. Transect 1 is also located in a wetland area. So they really did a good job of spacing these transects out from my experience with the park to get a good impression of all of the different ranges of species. So comparing the transects, and this, my apologies, is ripped directly from the slides that they shared, that they insisted that were the property of the museum. So in 2004, they showed that transect 4 had no honeysuckle removal done. Transect 2 was mostly cleared. Transects 1 and 3 have been largely cleared. Transect 5 had the largest population of native trees, and obviously that's the old growth area. In 2019, they showed that transects 1 and 3 had extensive restoration activity. Transect 4 had some, and transect 5 had none. So they categorized the species in a tree layer and an herbaceous layer. They categorized trees as anything greater than or equal to 10 centimeters in diameter of breast height. They used a quarter sampling method at 10 transects along, or 10 points along the transect, which means that they found every 10 meters along the transect, they found the closest tree, and that was the tree. And then they measured the distance between the transect and the tree, and they also measured the DBH and obviously accounted the species of the tree. For the herbaceous layer, they did 1 meter square plots around that same 10 meters along the transect. They classified importance value. They did a floristic quality assessment, and they categorized the relative importance value of species. The woody species that were found, American elm. We have a surprisingly high portion of fairly young American elms in the park. Amur honeysuckle obviously has a really high importance value. Bitternut hickory, black locust, box elder. A lot of these species you would expect to find along a floodplain. Some of the more upland species are due to the all of the gravel that you can find underneath the soils, obviously. which is why it was a gravel pit. So we have, although we have really silty, loamy soils, they're also very well draining. So the species with the greatest importance value in 2004 were box elder, black locust, elm, and buckeye. And this was the same for 2019. The largest trees found along these transects in 2004 included silver maple and cottonwood. This changed to 2019 to honey locust, cottonwood, and American sycamore. So obviously we lost some large silver maples. I suspect that the large American sycamores and honey locusts were obviously there in 2004 as well, but perhaps not the closest to the transect. Tree of Heaven was removed entirely from these transects between 2004 and 2019. That remains true today. We keep on top of the Tree of Heaven because we know how nasty of an invasive species that one can be. And they really did such a great job of removing that from the park spaces. We have a little bit of it on the main campus that we're still tackling in some areas. But the goal obviously is to keep it completely off of campus. That's one that if you are tasked with Tree of Heaven removal, don't cut it down and then treat it because it will, if you cut it down without first killing the tree, it will shoot up runners almost immediately, and you'll end up with more of an issue than you did before. So it's really critical to kill that species before. If it's not in a forested area where it could impact other trees around it, using a basil oil is recommended. But if you are in an area where you could impact other tree species, like a hack and treat method can be utilized, or peeling away some bark and treating that and trying to kill it that way is highly recommended rather than cutting down the tree. That also helps move the chemicals through the cambium to the leaves from the roots, or to the roots from the leaves. So it circulates throughout the tree and helps to kill it, that the main tree and the runners that are also connected to the tree. Only half as many more honeysuckle were found along the transects in 2019, and black locust obviously was present. Because it's native to the state in 2004, it was likely not considered a non-native tree, but in 2019, it's certainly ecologists and botanists have seen how that species can devastate certain areas and create monocultures. Here are some of the flowering trees in the park. Obviously, here's Ailanthus, the Tree of Heaven that I was just rambling about. Ohio buckeye in the middle, which is native and highly desirable and just a gorgeous tree. And the black locust, the tree that I was also rambling about, the Robinia pseudoacacia, that we have a really high importance value of that species in our canopy, and are trying to really be mindful about replacing that with some more desirable species with higher wildlife value. So in terms of the herbaceous layer data of this Butler University study, they found that there were 38 species present along the transects in 2004 and 41 in 2019, which is great. That is an improvement. It's not a huge improvement, but it's an improvement. Around 80% native flora in both. So as far as like the species listed, around 80% were native in both 2004 and 2019. The mean number of species per plot increased within the study period. So that means that there's a higher biodiversity within their sample plots. And obviously that improves habitat quality. Biodiversity means that more things can utilize that space. So it fills more niches within the insect and animal communities and can sustain more wildlife. Here you can see that, I won't bore you too much with this data, but the relative importance value of Amur honeysuckle dropped significantly over the study period. So it was it had the highest relative importance value in 2004, with 22%, and was 3.3% in 2019. Garlic mustard, which is another one of those really early invasives that came over with early colonizers of the United States as an herb. We see throughout forests in central Indiana. Garlic mustard was not even in the top 10 species of relative importance in 2019. So that shows really successful restoration efforts of those spaces. Winter creeper euonymus doubled in importance value between the two study years, which is consistent with findings by this group, by Rebecca Dolan and Marcia Moore. They have found that throughout these natural spaces where honeysuckle is removed, winter creeper euonymus is increased. I've heard many people say that winter creeper euonymus and honeysuckle have a symbiotic relationship. And this shows that that's not quite true. I think obviously winter creeper still does okay under honeysuckle, unlike a lot of things, but it clearly thrives in the removal of honeysuckle. So the study found in 2004 garlic mustard, bittersweet, field bindweed, oriental bittersweet. I guess that distinction is necessary. Winter creeper, winged euonymus, ground ivy. I assume that means English ivy. Japanese hops, which is a really horrible invasive that we find throughout the floodplain of the White River. It has razor sharp edges and is it's not something you want to walk through. And Amur honeysuckle, obviously. In 2019, the only one of these species that was reduced entirely was winged euonymus. All the others were still found to be present. So in their floristic quality assessment, this measures the overall quality of the habitat. It incorporates the C value, which is the conservation value, in addition to the number of species present. So C value from 0 to 10, 0 means it's invasive or non-native entirely. A value of 10 means that it really only populates in niche environments, and it's really an indicator of high quality habitat. They found that that these factors improved between 2004 and 2019. They found that the mean C value, mean native C value. So they calculated for native plants that were present on the site in addition to the overall C value. So those are two different numbers, and the FQI is also here for the native. An FQI greater than 50 is significant from a regional perspective. You're not going to find very many high quality spaces in Indianapolis. So if you get an FQI higher than 50, it shows that you have a really high quality habitat. So this basically shows that if if only the native species were present on the site and none of the invasive species were present, we'd have a really high quality habitat. So with continued remediation efforts, or I keep saying remediation, even though I corrected Brooke at the very beginning of this presentation, but with continued reclamation efforts, we can have a really high quality habitat for plants and animals on this space. So here, just quickly, they compared to the 2004 coefficient of conservation with the 2019 for species found along the transects, and found that some species had been introduced that had really high C values. I am not sure in their methods whether they included plants that had been planted or whether they only include plants that had reproduced within that space. But I will show you, we have an additional floristic quality assessment by Ecologic that was done right after this study that took that into consideration. They also, just to show the C values of observed species. So they recorded all of their observed species in 2019 and recorded the C values. And obviously that's a lot higher than the species along the transects, because there is high biodiversity on the site. Chandler's list is here. Here is all of the species. So we collect data. We love data. Not only do we keep the GIS, we also keep Excel sheets. We have, for our gardens, in addition to the park, we have every species that we've ever bought in spreadsheets and in files. So, so Chandler has a list of all of the species that were planted in the park, and that's what that is, the C values of all of the species that have been planted. And then everything, I assume that's the combination of the total 2019 and Chandler's list, and the C values there. So they had a thank you to Kelly Brown and Amber Rowland. Kelly Brown is now with the White River Alliance and is still working on the water quality assessments for the site. And she's a great partner if you haven't had the opportunity to work with her. And obviously all of these other acknowledgements. They determined with their study that the ecological restoration was on track to create a natural area of high quality. So Kevin Tungesvik came to the park in 2021 and did an additional floral inventory. This was following the creation of the Wild Birds Unlimited Native Pollinator Meadow. The pollinator meadow included the installation of over 50,000 individual plants with over 80 species. This makes over 70,000 native plants that have been installed in the park over the time of remediation or reclamation. So he really, in his report, was really mindful to say that he didn't want to include any of the species that were directly planted, that he included in his assessment plants that naturally occurred on the site due to the removal of invasives, or that had resulted through, that had propagated naturally following the introduction of these planted species. He found, so of the 454 total species on the property, 369 naturally occurring species were included in his floral assessment. And he found no rare, threatened, or endangered species in 2021. I believe Dolan and Moore considered butternut to be a species of concern in their assessment. And somebody on here, I'm sure, can tell me if what that is still the case. I know that we have some butternuts on the property. So of the 369 naturally occurring species, 256 were native and 113 were non-native. We have a broad range of habitats that includes all of these. I know I'm running a little low on time, but this is all the different habitats that we have in the park. So being along a riparian area with a lake and wetlands and these really nutrient-rich soils, we have a lot of different habitats available to plants and animals. So he found that in the primary floristic quality assessment, found mean native C values of 3.1 and FQI of 49.6. Total mean C value of 2.2 with a FQI of 42.3. So really still pretty good. If 50 means you're excelling, 42.3 means that these efforts are really working fairly well. In the prairie and pollinator plantings, the FQI was brought down significantly by invasive and non-native species that had been allowed to repopulate in those spaces. So, but like I said, we're out there weeding and really trying to mitigate that. We've removed all of the bush honeysuckle out of the native pollinator plantings around the parking lot, and we had the control burn in those areas recently, and we're really working to remove invasives from those spaces to get the FQI and C values up. So here are my citations, and I will stop there and ask for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fabulous. Appreciate that. We do have some questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and just lead into what's been shared in the chat. And then after that, if people have more questions, you can enter them either in the chat or unmute and ask yourself. But so far, what we've heard, a question for Lisa: what method do you use to combat the invasive ranunculus?
Yes, so they're really early spring before the other spring ephemerals. So ranunculus is one of the earliest emerging spring ephemerals. So although it's not wise to treat something as it's shooting all of its energy up, as soon as it's hardened off, and you can start to see those glossy leaves, you can hit it with a chemical. I'm trying to remember what I think it is. You'll have to forgive me. We didn't. When you're in direct contact with the floodplain, it's not recommended to treat it. So it's only recommended to treat it in more upland areas where you're not going to get those constant bulblets. The using shoe brooms or something similar if you have an area that people will walk through the bulblets and then walk up through a higher quality area is ideal. But let me. I will have to give me.
If you want to follow up in an email, I can share that with the registrants.
That's what I was going to say. I know that there's a chemical other than glyphosate that's recommended. You can use glyphosate, but there's a chemical other than glyphosate that's recommended for that area or for that species. And I'll have to follow up on that one.
Okay, yeah, I'll look for fine. And then another question, what is the best way to remove black locust, a small sapling, let's say?
Black locust is another one that is really, it runners a lot even if you cut it down. If you cut it and treat it, cutting it and treating it with something really strong like Tordon is somewhat effective. With a small sapling, you would probably have luck with Tordon or triclopyr. But using, if you're not in a forested area, using like a basil oil to kill it before cutting it and creating those runners would really be ideal.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, is it possible to drain the gravel pit and then manage it mostly as wetland or slough? He asked, did I see it was 40 feet deep in areas? Probably not an easy task. So,
right. And that's where, yes, the recommendation for gravel pit areas is not to fill them in as a lake. Obviously, I think because they can provide such critical habitat, and that study that I referenced very early in my presentation really did a good job of providing an overview of all of the different habitat niches that can be utilized in an upland gravel pit. Being as close to the river as we are, there just isn't any way. We have too much groundwater flow, which that's a graphic perhaps I should have included in this presentation. We have, because our bedrock is so low, we have a lot of groundwater flow through our soils, and so we have constant recharge. So when a gravel pit is installed in this close of a riparian area, there's a constant outflow because of all the water from groundwater that they have to pump out in order to mine the gravel. So not only would it fill in from groundwater in our location, we also, being in that floodplain, it would fill in. I think the river overflows the berm in the 30-year flood prediction. So within 30 years, even if we did drain that lake, we would have, it would fill in again. even if it weren't for groundwater flow, just the location close to the river, it would fill in again.
I see, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting question though. Let's see, Shirley Fry asked, can you please review treatment to kill tree of heaven? What is injected into uncut tree after bark removal to kill it?
Oh, glyphosate.
Glyphosate?
So, yeah, so glyphosate can be used. That's another one. If you're not close to if you're not in a water table, basil oil will translocate into water. So as someone who cares very much about clean water and the aquatic habitats as well as the terrestrial habitats, don't use basil oil if you're near water, but you can use basil oil if you're in an upland setting away from other trees, but it will translocate to other species underground as it moves through the roots. Using some sort of, I was told, which I've heard mixed things about girdling the tree, but I was told that what Chandler did to kill a tree of heaven was he stripped the bark all the way around and then used glyphosate on that, which was a tactic that I had never heard of before, but I was told that was utilized in the park effectively. So that is something that I have tried. I tried this fall on a couple places after hearing that, and I'll find out in the spring whether it worked.
Yeah, it really is an amazing kind of outdoor laboratory, isn't it?
Yes. That wasn't, like I said, we have not found in the park. That wasn't in the park itself. That was on the main campus. So
Okay. All right. Forward to another season in the park. It's just such an amazing, valuable space in Indianapolis. And just looking at all those different habitat types that you listed, I think it would be great to have a tour just to really look at each different habitat type and understand the complexity there.
I think that would be great. We're still working on some some restoration of the wetland there. But we certainly we have riparian wetlands. We have the lake wetlands, littoral wetlands, and a lot of different species or a lot of different habitats. We could certainly do a tour. And I look forward to working with you on additional projects.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And I think this Saturday you have the Wake Up Woods hike, don't you? So much for all of your work, Lisa, and for tonight's presentation. And I really do look forward to getting back out in the park and seeing you there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.